Now, in a kingdom very, very near.
Arthur, do hurry. The passengers are boarding.
Prepare yourselves
Welcome aboard.
for the ultimate Disneyland thrill attraction from the imagination of Disney and George Lucas. Because now, the adventure is real. Star Tours at Disneyland.
It was 30 years ago, January 9th, 1987, that Star Tours opened at Disneyland in Anaheim, California. In Disney's second collaboration with George Lucas, right after Captain EO, Imagineers went to work creating this innovative 3D flight simulator attraction.
Here now to help us celebrate the 30th anniversary of Star Tours is Mark Eades, who served as media producer and casting director.
Okay, so we had this droid, and we had him named, and we had to find a voice for it. Well, of course, that's my job. It was tough. I mean, it's people don't understand how hard it is to cast a voice for something, particularly when it's a new character. It's really easy when it's an existing kind of character. You just have to match it, right? Mm-hmm. So here you have a brand new character, which, WED really wasn't doing a lot of. And to be honest, at the time, Disney Animation wasn't doing a lot of, and they were used to using stars and things like that and whatever. So we had this character. It was designed, and we had a write-up of what it was. It was kind of this manic, full of itself, knew what it was doing, but really didn't character. And okay, that's great. Let's go find a voice. And we kept trying voice after voice. Then we started bringing in some people, including some classic standbys, as I call it, that we'd use. One was Frank Welker, who's done a lot of brilliant cartoon voices.
Yeah.
We tried female B.J. Ward, who actually did a lot of safety spiels at Epcot. I mean, I was bringing her in probably once a month because they kept updating the safety spiels. And just nothing worked. It just didn't work. And, of course, George Lucas was going to have to sign off on the voice, too. Now, meanwhile, of course, I've already hired Anthony Daniels to do C-3PO, and I had to make that deal and all that kind of stuff. That's easy. Here you're having to create a new voice for a character. Right. Well, part of what I used to do back then, because, you're just nowadays I don't hardly go to movies. Back then I'd go to movies all the time because you did, and I just go by myself because I never know, I might hear a voice or something. So I did go to a lot of cartoons and things that had voices in them. And for some reason, I went to see Flight of the Navigator. So I went to see it, and after the spaceship gets screwed up, and of course it becomes this really kind of crazy voice, I go, who the hell is that,
If you want to learn to swim, you've got to jump in the water.
Don't forget to feed Bruiser. 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Whoa! This can't be happening. I think I've gotten some stuff out of your head that has nothing to do with navigating this ship.
Now, remember, this is before, other than people who went to nightclubs, knew who Paul Rubens was, or Pee Wee Herman. He hadn't really had his film yet. He hadn't had Pee Wee's Playhouse or anything. And I'm going, who the hell is that? And, I stayed to the end just to see the credits. Said Paul Rubens. Okay, well, that's a great voice. And I was like floored. I came into the work. This was at night, right? I came into the office the next day, and Tom Fitzgerald came in, and I said, Tom, what are you doing? He said, well, Tom, I don't care what you're doing. I had already looked up the times of when the movie would be playing at some movie theaters around back then. And remember, we didn't have multiplexes back then.
Or YouTube.
Yeah, nothing. You had to go to a movie to see it, and you were lucky if it was a duplex and it had multiple showings. And I said, I don't care what you're doing. Right now, I want you to go see Flight of the Navigator because I found our voice. It's the voice of the ship. Just go. And he was like, well, no, I don't care what you just do it. Because by then we're getting closer, right?
Right.
And he says, okay. So he goes, and he comes back, and he had enough faith, says, book him. So we booked him. Again, we're going to have George approve this. So I had a consultant who got a hold of him on the set of Pee Wee's Playhouse. The first year. They were in production for the first season.
Wow.
I actually talked to him and came back to me and said, okay, he's interested. We need to make an offer. And I said, okay. So we ended up making a deal. Now, one of the things he wanted was a lifetime pass, which I said, I don't know that I can do that.
That's awesome. Go, Paul.
No, yeah. And I'm like, well, that became a bit of a bone of contention, but I went and they said, okay, that's fine. I worked out the language so he would get a silver pass for life. It doesn't go to his heirs as long as the voice is used in the attraction.
Hi there. Welcome aboard. This is Captain Rex.
We brought him in, and he did the first big session, and we had to send a limo the first time because he had a manager at the time who was kind of an ass and wanted me to treat him like a star and all that. But the guy knew how to drive. After that, he said, "Don't do the limo again." I said, "I'll drive myself. I'm a big boy." And I said, "Okay, fine." But we recorded it. Now, again, we have to get George's approval still, right?
Right.
So we set it up. We recorded it. We really liked it, but we sent it up to George. He loved it. And that's how Paul Reubens became the voice of Rex.
What would you say the biggest hurdle was in bringing this from like a concept to reality?
It's a 4.5 minute continuous take, and it's in film. And this is before CG. So dial your way back machine to how things were done back then.
All right, so let me ask you, what take did we finally see?
Well, there's 9 cuts.
Oh.
They're hard to find. 2 of them are obvious. They're in the, the hyperspace scene.
Right.
Okay.
And there's one in the comet scene, believe it or not. But we shortly after we'd done all this, and it was like, okay, it was before we kind of had the brainstorming session, and we kind of had the long storyline. So it was time to get everybody together, the WED team and the ILM and George and company. So they all came down to us, and we had our facility at Tujunga where we could screen things, right? Mm-hmm. And let's see, Marty Sklar was there, Randy Bright, myself, Tom Fitzgerald, Carlo Bongiorno, who was the president of WED. From Lucasfilm, you had George, and you had Dennis Murin, and several others. And after we had the screening, and then we had the thing, we all just gathered our chairs around in a circle just to start talking about how are we going to do this. So here we are sitting around, and all of a sudden Dennis is talking about how we're going to make the film. And he's going, yeah, we can cut to this angle for this part, and then we can cut to this angle for this part. And then when the TIE fighters come ahead, we can cut to this angle. And I'm listening to this, and I'm getting fidgety. And Randy and Don Henderson, who was a production manager, worked with us at the time, is looking at me, and I'm like, what's wrong? And I'm not even paying attention to them. And I finally, they stopped for a minute. I said, okay, hold it. And everybody's staring at me. Of course, Mark Eades is about to put his foot in his mouth, right? And I stood up and I said, you guys don't understand. You can't cut in this. What do you mean you can't cut? And I go, somebody asked, and I said, look, this thing is you're on board the Star Speeder 3000. We knew that's what we were going to call it, or at least we were. I said, and you're looking out a window. The problem with looking out a window is you can't suspend that disbelief. It's not a movie. It is now a window. It's a point of view, and we can't cut. And I'm looking right at Dennis Murin, and he's got, Oscars holding up both ends of his bookcase, right? And here's this guy who's never produced a feature film in his life type thing, other than I've been around him, telling somebody like him how to make a movie, right? And I just stared at him. But I'll give him this because I was passionate about this, right? I knew I was right. And I was prepared to, fall on the sword. And I'm looking at Dennis, and he stood back for a minute. He kind of stroked his chin. And George just was quiet. And then Dennis goes, gosh, he used another word, but he says, he's right. We can't. This is going to be hard. And it kind of ended the meeting in a way. They started talking. All I know is later on that day, we're back at WED, and I'm walking in the first floor, and here comes Randy walking towards me. He goes, are you sure we can't cut, Mark? And I go, Randy, it's got to be one point of view or it won't work. And they did it.
For a second, I thought this story was going to end with Dennis throwing a couple of his Oscars at you.
No. Well, he didn't have them with him, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's funny how they didn't really see this because it is a point of view from the inside of the Star Speeder, so you can cut.
Yeah, they were thinking of it as a movie,
as a film,
like
right? That's
movie.
what they were best at.
And to make that whole willing suspension of disbelief, you can't cut. The one thing I always loved about working on attractions was just being there when real people could see it and getting the reaction.
Right.
We heard this comment in passing as a group was walking out, And a guy goes, can you imagine how many miles of track Disney had to build underneath Disneyland for this ride? So between those two, I knew we'd done it, you know?
Yeah.
Nick Brown on our Facebook group asks, what was the biggest change from conception to completion?
The name.
The name, really?
What was it?
Well, because remember, this is when Eisner and Wells had come in, and even though we were calling it Star Tours from like day one, right?
Right.
For some reason, Michael had this thing where it had to have the word ride in the name. So we had to design everything with the name Star Rides. Now, we always recorded everything. We recorded it with that, but we'd also do the Star Tours recording. But the graphics, et cetera, were Star Rides for a long time, but we kept holding up production on it because we're like, we really needed it to be Star Tours. And, you know, he would not listen. And then about 5 or 6 months out, he finally acquiesced and said, okay, you can call it Star Tours. So that was the biggest. I mean, things evolve as you're going through it, but it really conceptually didn't change other than we had to get from an 11-minute story to a, 4.5-minute plus load unload story. So that's an editing process. So there were a lot of places we wanted to go that we obviously couldn't, and they were supposed to be saved for the next film because the idea was we would produce a new film every 3 years. And put a different one in each cab because it was filmed back then. But the darn thing was so popular, we were never allowed to do so. So I was very, very pleased when the digital projection got good enough that we could do that, and that they could do multiple trips, not the same every time. Because we always wanted to go back and let's fly to Tatooine and let's fly through the indoor forest, all that fun stuff.
All right, now, let me ask you the big one. Have you, Mark Eades, ever been the rebel spy? Because I know I haven't.
No comment.
Oh!
You have been, haven't you? Many times.
I haven't been on it that many times.
And you were still a rebel spy!
I think they plotted with the public, because I was in the news by then, they plotted to make me sit in a chair that they knew I was going to get nailed, and it was kind of a crack up.
Oh,
Sarah's been rebel spy like 3 or 4 times.
I think it's 5 times now.
No, I call myself the Susan Lucci of Star Tours.
Yes.
Well, you guys go on it more than I do.
Yes.
I know, that's the problem.
We go on it like every time we go to Disneyland.
And still, I've never.
Neverland on Alderaan. Some imagination, huh?